A very good afternoon or evening, depending on wherever you are, and a very warm welcome to the first ever environment panel of the London School of Economics Student Union India Forum 2022. My name is Hasti Modi. I'm the president of LIF 2022 and a second-year Master of Public Administration student at the LSE. I'll be serving as your co-moderator this evening. Today, we'll be having a thoroughly insightful and an engaging discussion about the quest for a non-zero India, challenges facing the greener republic, and what we can do to contribute towards making India more sustainable. This is in line with the main theme of our conference, which is Rethink, Restructure, Rebuild. Before we begin, I wanted to take a minute to thank everyone on the LIF team, which has organized this massive event for a week for us. The LIF has an enduring legacy for serving as the UK's largest student-led India-centric conference. And this year, we are proud to open it up for international as well as domestic students, as well as professionals, an avenue to engage with truly inspirational Indian personalities from various industries. Speaking of inspirational Indian personalities for our environment panel, I feel humbled to introduce a seriously impressive panel today. Mr. Satya Rapati, who is the Secretary General of the Global Alliance for a Sustainable Planet. Mr. Tripathi is an alumnus of LSE and is a civil servant, a development economist, and a lawyer by profession who has over 40 years of varied experiences as a global change maker. He has served the UN for more than 2 decades in key positions across the planet and was most recently the UN Assistant Secretary General and the head of New York office at UN Environment, as well as the secretary of the UN Environment Management Group. Mr. Tripathi has been instrumental in establishing the Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility, TLFF, in Indonesia in 2016, and the Sustainable India Finance Facility, SIFF, in 2017 to leverage private finance for public good at mega scale to achieve transformational social and environmental impact for millions of people in developing countries. Ms. Runa Ray, who is a fashion environmentalist. Ms. Runa Ray is a fashion designer and an environmentalist who uses art as activism to advocate for policy change. She has worked extensively with the Sustainable Development Goals and climate action at the United Nations. As an innovator, her designs encompass the reduce, reuse, and recycle model. By keeping the end in mind, she has helped revive ancient indigenous techniques of garmenting that reduce our impact on Earth, alongside science-based ideas from renewable energy. Her expertise in the circularity of fashion industry and zero waste initiatives helps designers, SMEs, and MMEs in abating climate change. Mr. Amol Shimpi, Associate Dean and Director of RICS School of Built Environment at Amity University. Mr. Shimpi is a real estate professional having rich and varied experiences across the life cycles of real estate development, from land acquisition and business development to strategic management and investment sales. He has over 20 years of experience in this field, and his designs are focused around sustainable development and ensuring reduction of carbon emission of real estate constructions. He is also the co-founder of SAS Investments, an investment management firm specializing in financial investment and real estate products and services. Finally, I'd like to introduce Ms. Garvita Gulhati, who is called the India's Water Girl. I'm very happy because we share age and also, of course, the motivation to work for climate and water conservation. Ms. Garvita Gulhati is the founder of Why Waste, which is the India's largest youth-led organization focused on water conservation. Why Waste changes mindsets and habits and promotes water conservation through campaigns, petitions, and workshops. Since its launch in 2015, Ms. Gulhati estimates that Why Waste organization work has reached about 10 million people and has impacted more than 5 lakh restaurants and has helped save 6 million liters of water. For her efforts, Ms. Gulhati has been recognized in the Forbes 30 Under 30 Asia list of 2021 and has been felicitated with the prestigious Dinah Award from the charity in honor of the late Princess of Wales last year. Finally, I'd like to introduce the moderator for this evening, Professor Nick Rawley, who is the senior lecturer in practice at the School of Public Policy at LSE, of course. Professor Nick is a proud alumnus of LSE and has over 20 years of experience advising and leading an environment, climate, and wider public policy in Australia, New York, the UK, and internationally. Between 2004 and 2006, he worked at Downing Street advising Prime Minister Tony Blair on climate change and sustainability. He played a vital role prior to the G8 leaders meeting in 2005, which is the first time when the climate problem had been placed on the agenda for the heads of state. Apart from his expertise in climate policy and politics, as well as executive decision-making, Professor Nick has been frequent commentator at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation for Climate Policy and British politics, and he's a great fan of Indian food. His favorite dish is dal makhani. So before opening the floor to discussion, just wanted to point out a few quick housekeeping notes. Since this is an online webinar, we might have some internet connectivity issues, but be assured that our team would ensure that the panel discussion runs smoothly. We aim to have Professor Nick moderate the discussion for about an hour, and then we will open up the floor to the audience questions for about 20 to 30 minutes. The audience can send in their questions in the Q&A section, which I will constantly monitor and pick out the most relevant questions. If you have a question targeted towards a specific panelist, please mention their names. And now, without any further delay, I'd like to hand it over to Professor Nick.
Asti, thank you very much. Thank you for informing everybody on this webinar about my various food loves. Dal makhani is certainly one of them. It's wonderful what you can do with some high quality urad dal and a bit of thyme and spices. But by way of context, I just wanted to say a few things. I received an email from Hasti last week. She was suggesting that I be part of this session, and I jumped at the chance. I jumped at the chance because I've worked on sustainability and broad climate policy for much of my career in various places. I now find myself here at the London School of Economics. The reason why I'm here at the new School of Public Policy is I believe that we can agree on pretty much all of the really difficult what questions, but the what questions then become how questions. And if you want to tackle those how questions, you need highly educated, credentialed, capable people who are working on those actions and policies. And we've got LSE alumni here on the webinar. So if I can play my part in helping educate, inspire, and really support people who want to devote their time and their careers to thinking through how we can create public value and reduce risks like global climate change, then that's purpose enough for me. And certainly when you look at a country like India, we don't need to say the obvious things about the size of its population and its economy, and indeed its emissions profile. But we certainly need really smart people who are looking to address and tackle these sorts of problems over the coming years. So this is a really wonderful opportunity over the next hour or so to interrogate really what that might mean. So what I've done with Hasti is tried to structure this as best as possible. I want this to be as interesting and energy-filled a session as possible. To do that, we've got a wonderful group of speakers who Hasti has already described to you. They've all been given the same job to do. They're going to be speaking for 8 minutes, and my hand is going to be going up at 7 minutes to let you and the audience and them know that it's time for them to start winding up. And they're all going to cover broadly two things. Firstly, we've asked them to say two things to share with you about themselves and their work, and you as people who care about India's future, and you who care about the environment. And the second thing that we've asked all of the speakers to do is, what do they believe the two decisions are that should be taken that will make a measurable difference to India's environment over the coming 20 to 30 years? If that's on the table, and then the wise and experienced heads on your Zoom screen stop talking, then challenge that. Ask questions, ask them to elaborate, ask them why they didn't say more, or they missed this out, or they couldn't say that without saying this. That's how I'd like to address this session. And I'd really like you to be sitting there listening and not just going, wow, aren't they clever, aren't they wise, aren't they interesting? You can say that, of course, but also be sure to step up, ask questions, challenge them, and then hopefully that will make for a really rich and useful session. So that's enough from me. We're going to start. I've got a little clock on my desk here in London, and we've got 8 minutes. Firstly, from Satya Rapati. Satya.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks everyone. It's my pleasure to be here this morning in New York time. I have a very simple argument to make in the Indian context. There's a moral argument and there's a practical argument. Now, if you're talking about moral argument, India has no reasons to do anything about the climate challenge. Why? Because the best of science tells us that the average carbon footprint of a human, because this is anthropogenic climate change, so we're talking about the anthropos or the humans. And so the average climate footprint, that's ideal, that keeps us all in a balance, keeps the web of life going. And when I say web of life, I mean the 8 million species, not just us. And that's 2.1 tons per capita. Now, guess what is the average per capita footprint of an Indian? Despite the fact that we are 1.4 billion people, it is just 1.9 tons. So if the carbon footprint is only 1.9 tons versus an ideal footprint of 2.1, what rationale does it have to tell India to act? None, because they are already under the ideal footprint. Now that's, of course, the global conversation, and I was a significant part of that conversation until a few months ago when I was heading the UN's Environment Management Group. The challenge there is that while the moral argument may simply not exist for India to act, the practical argument is compelling and consequential from India's perspective. It is a zero-sum game, unfortunately. The carbon problem, or the greenhouse gas emission problem, or more popularly, the global warming problem, is not a one country problem. It is not a one region problem. It's not a one continent problem. It's a problem in the atmosphere. It affects us all. So while you may not have created a problem or contributed precious little to it, if it affects you, you have to act. Let me explain why. India has 21 of the worst 30 polluted cities in the world. Our water levels are dropping precipitously. In some agricultural regions, it's as much below the ground as 200 or even 300 feet. That's how far you have to go if you are a farmer to fetch water for your agriculture. Floods, droughts, unpredictable weather disturbances, and one could just go on and on. It is increasing at an alarming pace. Soil organic carbon, which should be roughly about 2.5% at the very least to have a meaningful agriculture, is now pretty much under 0.5% in most parts of India, except for very rare exceptions. That's pretty much becoming the norm. Now with that, you can hardly feed the 1.4 billion people that need nutritious food to be able to fulfill their potential. Now, these are the reasons why India needs to act, not because a bunch of rich countries produced all the carbon emissions and that India is left holding the can. That may be true, but that cannot be the argument we bank upon when we talk about our people and the planet, of course. And India has had a great tradition of standing up for environment, standing up for Mother Nature. If you go back thousands of years and look back at the heritage of India, the ancient heritage and the cultural heritage, you will find that in pretty much every folklore, every fable, every mythology that you can pick up talks about protecting nature, talks about conserving water, talks about trees being the friends of the people, and we being friends of nature and forests and the landscapes. So we need to draw from that deep reservoir of knowledge, wisdom, and experience to do what we can to save the planet. Now, the one thing that the world needs to do is to keep its promises, because the IPCC report just came out. For those of you that are following the science would know that the 1.5 degree future that everybody talks about is not in some distant 2100, or as by the turn of the century, as is popularly mentioned, it's 2040. And actually, the World Meteorological Organization tells us that we'll get to 1.5 degrees, and there's a 70% chance of that happening in the next 5 years, not even 2040. That's how bad the situation is. And at 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, you'll have 70% of your coral reefs bleaching. That's science. That's not speculation anymore. And one could just talk ad nauseum about all the dominoes falling all around us, leading to a complete breakdown of the climate and the weather, as we know, whether you're talking about the macroclimate or the microclimate. Now, the two things that give me real hope in the context of India is A, the engagement with soil. Soils, as we know, have the ability of holding 3 times as much carbon as is in the atmosphere. Something that started as an experiment in the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh in 2015 has now grown to 1 million farmers strong. 1 million farmers in that state have actually converted now from synthetic chemical farming to natural farming, which is a process of bioinoculation. It's not organic farming. Organic farming is expensive. Organic farming is also fertilizer-based, although it uses a biomass fertilizer, not a chemical fertilizer. The process of bioinoculation, and it's at scale now with 50 organizations from around the world working with the government of Andhra Pradesh and the women farmers of that state to bring about a change that has already made it the world's largest agroecology-based farming program. And they have 6 million farmers. They're going to get there, and that work is already moving on in full speed. The Prime Minister of India on 16th of December, speaking at the Natural Farming Conclave a few months earlier, spoke about getting out of the chemistry labs into the lab of nature. Now, when we talk about research, we are in a great, we're speaking at an LSE forum, and I'm, as Hasti mentioned, I'm a very proud alumnus of this institution. And when we talk about research, what we are talking about, even if it is frontier cutting edge research, we're talking about this little. Mother Nature is the greatest researcher of all. She has been at it for billions of years. So we're trying to only understand what she has already created, produced, developed, shunned away, and brought it back. The species churn that happens all the time, which nature orchestrates. So we know very little. And as Einstein famously said, we know 1,000th of 1% of what actually nature has to offer. And when we jump with joy, when we find plastic or we find these materials that are in the billions of tons scale in our environment now, we really need to stop, think, and understand the true implications of what we have found and what it might do to the environment. So the greatest possibility I see in India is that's the big idea, that if India can switch to natural farming, we are talking about 120 million smallholder farmers, and their economy their resource availability at the bottom of the pyramid, it changes completely. Even at an average family size of 4, that's 500 million people we are talking about. And that could change everything in India. That's the first thing. The second idea is that none of it would be possible without money, because you need resources. So the promise that the countries of the world made in the Paris Agreement to produce $100 billion a year by 2020, sadly, 2020 has come and gone, and we haven't seen even a cumulative 100 billion, let alone $100 billion a year. Now, the reason why they should do it is not because it's a good thing to do, or it's good charity. It's not. It's taking responsibility for your actions. Highly industrialized nations are also the most prosperous nations. So share a little bit of that prosperity, and it'll save us on. And to that end, the Global Alliance is working with the Planning Ministry of India, Niti Aayog, and some of the iconic institutions around the world, including the Green Climate Fund, to set up the world's largest climate fund solely focused on India. It's a 50 billion fund. And I'm happy to let you know that last week, the government of India provided its in-principle approval for the fund. And now we are working to build that one so that the resources are available for India to make those tectonic shifts that will not only save India, but also save the planet. Thank you.
Satya, thank you very much. You went a little over time, but that was so clear. Soil and money. That's a pretty nice synthesis, and we can scratch into that further and ask you to elaborate further. And any questions about that, I've got a number, particularly around nature-based solutions, but nobody tuned in to listen to me. They tuned in to listen to other people. Runa, off you go, 8 minutes.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for this opportunity to speak at the London School of Economics India Forum, the moderators, the panelists, and for those listening. I'm Runa Ray, a fashion environmentalist who uses fashion to bridge social and environmental concerns and address the challenges caused by man. I'm given 8 minutes to speak. I hope it's to the second, but it's a vast subject, and I will try to cover a few points that are impactful to the industry as a whole. But before I tell you what I do, I think it's extremely important to tell you what the industry does. Fashion is a $1 trillion industry, estimated to be $2.5 trillion by 2025. And it's responsible for all the hidden costs that come with it: child labor, unsafe practices, and its impacts on the environment. It is also important to safeguard the interests of humans as well as the environment, as it is impossible for the two to exist independently without each other. Fashion is also known to be one of the most polluting industries in the world, contributing to 20% of the global wastewater because of the dyeing and textile industry, and also responsible for the depletion of the world's arable lands because of cultivation of commercial crops using clothing, animals farmed for fur, byproducts of the fossil fuels such as polyester, which takes hundreds of years to biodegrade, and not to mention the landfill of clothes because of fast fashion. Okay, so let's talk about the dyeing industry. The textile dyeing industry completely compromises the aesthetic quality of water bodies. It impairs photosynthesis, inhibits plant growth, and enters the food chain, and also promotes toxicity. During the coloration process, a large percentage of dye does not bind to the fabric and is lost to the wastewater stream. An approximate of 10 to 15% dyes are released into the environment during the dyeing process, and makes it a great environmental concern when it comes to the absorption and reflection of light, because light absorption diminishes photosynthetic activity of algae on the food chain. And as algae is the base of the food chain, it affects every organism above it. The second big aspect is plastic pollution. And right now, while we're speaking about this, we have the plastic treaty, which is being drafted and hopefully signed at UNEA 5. 60% of our clothes are made of plastic-based materials. And if you take a moment to look at the labels of the clothes that you're wearing, the materials is probably something like a blend of synthetic plastic-based fibers, such as polyester, nylon, or polyamide. Plastic is not just in fabrics itself, but also in buttons, threads, zips, embellishments. Everything from underwear, sports kits, to wedding dresses and trainers contain plastics. Approximately 65% of all fibers in clothing is polyester, and a vast amount of that is virgin polyester. Throughout the life cycle, textiles contribute to a wide-scale plastic pollution crisis. Synthetic materials shed microplastics, and while we are wearing clothes and laundering clothes, they are degrading in the landfill and also contributing to the pollution of the oceans. Microplastics are really tiny plastics that are less than 5 mm in length, and textile source is one of the primary source of microplastics, which accounts to 34.8% of the global microplastic pollution. Microfibers are a kind of microplastic which is released when we wash synthetic clothing. These fibers detach from our clothes during the washing process, and they go into the wastewater. While the wastewater goes into the sewage treatment facilities, since these fibers are so small, they pass through the filtration processes and make their way through the rivers and the seas. It is estimated that 700,000 fibers come off our synthetic clothes in a typical wash. And that's why I keep talking about consumer education when it comes to washing clothes, because 60% resides with us consumers, with the actions that we need to take. So if the fashion industry continues the way it is estimated by 2050, 22 million tons of microfibers would have entered the oceans. And this is according to the McKinsey report. Due to the tiny size, they are ingested by marine animals and can have catastrophic effects on the species and the entire marine system, and of course, making their way into the food that we eat. While we cannot completely get rid of synthetic garments, upcycling of clothes can go a long way in preventing them entering the landfill and using them to create new garments, and of course, R&D into new natural fibers. Despite fashion's reliance on synthetic fibers, biological fibers continue to make 38% of the global fiber production, primarily in the form of cotton and man-made cellulosic fibers. Polyester currently has a cost advantage rooted in oil subsidies and decades of invested R&D. But by shifting those economic drivers and increasing R&D, the industry can make natural fibers more cost competitive. As natural fiber processing has remained unchanged for decades, it's foolish to dismiss that natural fibers are too expensive without actually exploring the potential of new developments. We definitely need new regional production where local impacts can be measured against planetary boundaries. New levels of economical restoration, biodiversity promotion, and the return of fair local jobs all will become possible if we shorten the supply chain. My work within the industry is to use fashion to carry a message, to educate and advocate for policy change, and find methods in the manufacturing process that can mitigate climate change. Some of the processes we employ are methods of printing, which negates water wastage and pollution by using indigenous methods that are age-old, and of course, the use of natural dyes. Collaborating with nonprofits to turn ghost fishing nets into fruit bags, and even learning from factories that convert fabric waste into paper. Working with a coalition of designers to promote circularity and zero waste techniques within the industry. My collaboration with the United Nations Ocean Decade helped us convert around 1 lakh garments, which would have ended up into a landfill, into canvases to advocate for policy change. These canvases have been created in schools and by inmates in prisons across the US, where they participate and upon which they write their commitments. These commitments are then, the canvases are sewn into a large flag, and this flag is then displayed in locations across the world. For India to march towards a green future, collaboration and research is key. Collaboration across multiple industries is required if we have to tackle pollution and carbon footprint caused within the industry. For example, material research, waste management, washing machine research and development, in collaboration with detergent manufacturers and the recycling industry, can come together to reduce microfiber pollution. Cross-industrial agreements can help promote collaboration between industry bodies and promote sharing of resources and knowledge. Another important decision to be taken is investing in people, in indigenous knowledge and skills of people who have used nature and worked with nature. It also means investing in regenerative agriculture that Mr. Tripathi just spoke about. It also means that animals need to be integrated into the cropping system in order to provide fertilizer and mimic the functions of wild grazing herds. Natural fibers using regenerative agricultural methods can build soil, sequester carbon, enhance biodiversity both above and below the ground, support ecosystem services, and also contribute to bi-regional economies at all the time. I believe if we help artisans and communities who have used age-old processes and practices in their methods, we cannot go wrong, because the time has come not to make life cheaper, faster, and easier, but to make it more valuable, wholesome, and sustainable. Thank you. I hope I was within the 8 minutes.
Runa, you were around about 4.5 seconds over, which was very disappointing to me as the chairman. But it's not too bad. Not too bad. Hey, look, that was fantastic. It was so interesting to hear what you said. I've got a number of things that I'd like to quiz you on the basis of what you've shared, but I won't do that now. Now I'm really looking forward to hearing the contribution from Garvita. Let's see if you can do even better than 4.5 seconds over.
To everyone. Am I audible?
I think you might just check your sound, Garvita. You're a little muffled.
Is this better?
It is better, but I wonder if you can even make it a bit louder.
All right, just give me 1 second.
This is better, sounds better now.
Yeah, that's a lot better, but I wonder if there's something else you can do.
Yes, just give me a second.
You never give up,
Okay.
Nick, do you?
Oh, no, I just tried.
Yeah, I hope this should be good now. I put it to.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good.
Great.
Okay, I'm not starting the clock. I'm
the-
starting the clock again. Okay, I just want to make it clear, right? Just to ease any
Thank you,
stress. Okay, all right, off you go, Garvita. Off you go.
Great. First up, thank you to everyone who's joined in, and thank you to the London School of Economics, Hasti, Nick, Professor Nick, and my fellow panelists. It's an honor to be here, and I'm incredibly excited to share a little bit of my journey and speak for the youth community, specifically when we talk about our involvement in climate change and what it really means for us to have our voices heard. I've been a change maker since I was 15. I started my journey over 6 to 7 years ago. And ever since, I've realized that our world is replete with problems all around us. And what impacted me the most was the water crisis. When I started to learn about the trivial ways in which we waste water, I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to make a difference. And I realized that the first step and the simplest thing that I could perhaps do was change the mindsets of people. So I started to build solutions that people could use and consume and really make their own to be able to become a part of the climate crisis. My goal was to empower people to realize that they too can make a difference, that we need each and every one's contribution when it comes to solving the climate crisis. I started my journey at the age of 15 when I learned that 14 million liters of water gets wasted every year, simply the water that we leave behind in glasses at restaurants. I created this very simple concept called glass half full, where you fill your glass only half instead of filling it full. That way you take just as much water as you need and you don't waste. Through this and through, years of relentless effort from the teams and people around me, of course, it, was a challenge being a young person, getting people to, listen to you. But it was an exciting challenge, and I got to learn a lot in the process, meet incredible new people, and really realize what it means to solve problems that exist in our ecosystem. Today, we continue to build and propagate solutions. We've written a book as well as developed a mobile application that helps you calculate your water footprint and then go on to learn simple ways that you can save at least 100 liters of water every day. Everything that we've built has been focused and has been driven by this singular mission that we want to empower
Garvita, can I just be very, very rude? And I'll try and do this with as much charm as I can. But your sound is very breaking up. And I don't know if it's a technical thing at your end, but you're sort of from coping, we're now getting maybe only occasional clear words. So I can just about follow you, but if there's anything that you can do to make it better, that would be fantastic.
Yes. I've set the input level to full. So,
right.
And I'm just going to eliminate any external voices. I really hope this works, and I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. We're all victims of technology. It's no problem. And I think maybe if you just speak slightly slower and with greater intonation, and you know, but I don't want you to be self-conscious. You're fine. I think it's a lot better than it was. So let's keep going. And I think you've probably got about 5 minutes. So we're really interested to hear what you have to say. So keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think what I was talking about was what has really driven us in our communities to build solutions. And in the process, and I want to come to, the first thing that Nick mentioned is how is it that Indian students who deeply care about India's future and the environment can go on to contribute towards it. What I realized is that we as a generation have grown up in a world that is incredibly different from any of the generations that came before us. We've grown up in a world that is volatile, ambiguous, uncertain, and we have been constantly shown and been exposed to problems in our ecosystems. And I think that's given us one incredible ability, which is to constantly think of solutions. And so to all of my peers and the Indian students out there who are worried about India's future, I would say that go ahead and find that one problem that you see in your ecosystem that you've always wanted to make a difference to, and realize that your contribution matters in the process. No matter how small or big the idea might be, you can make a difference if you just take that first step. I never thought that just asking people to fill their glasses half would lead to something so incredibly large, but it did. And that happened because I believed in the small idea of change. And I believe in the capabilities and the capacity of my peers in the ecosystem. And I truly nudge all of you to find that curiosity to drive impact. Work towards what matters to you. And it doesn't have to be just the things that you do, but really there's so much you can contribute to even sitting at home. Today, remote systems have allowed us to become a part of ecosystems globally more simply. And I think today, India is replete with opportunities and we just need to grab it, be it building solutions or finding ways in which you can learn to become a part of these ecosystems. I always love to say that today, in a world where change is the only constant, we are now in the constant need of change makers, and that is the Indian youth. And I think both Dr. Satya and Runa were very, meticulous in sharing the solutions that Indians are building, that Indian ecosystems are building, and we need to realize that our unique perspectives can add incredible value to all of these. And I think two decisions that can be taken to make a measurable difference in India. The first, pushing from my previous points, would be youth inclusion at all levels, right? Having a young person's voice, the fact that I'm part of this panel makes me believe that this is a possibility. It makes me realize that this needs to happen at all levels in all ecosystems, building systems that are multilateral, something that the United Nations has in a lot of ways pioneered, which is bringing together various ecosystems to build out solutions. And I think the second thing would be really measuring corporate actions. When I look at the ecosystems of water consumption specifically, there's one thing I'd really, love to share. It's this concept called virtual water. Now, virtual water is also called hidden water, and it is water that exists in every single product that we consume, be it the clothes that you wear or the food that you eat. To manufacture a pair of jeans, it takes almost 2,000 liters of water. That's incredibly huge. And by simply making a decision to not over-purchase or to recycle your clothes, you yourself can be a part of making a huge, huge change and saving thousands and thousands of liters of water. So I would say that one, by measuring corporate action, ourselves individually and realizing what our footprints, be it carbon or water, are on this planet, we can compel businesses to change the way that they function, the products that they create, and really transform everything in our ecosystems by simply choosing right. And so I think with this, I want to conclude that each and every one of us has the capacity to make a difference. I want to quote a quick example when it came to the plastic straws movement. It was the people who refused to use it which compelled governments to change policies and businesses to change strategies. And we need to do that with every ecosystem to build new and to build for a more sustainable world. Thank you, Nick, and back to you.
Oh, well, thank you, Garvita. Thanks so much. It's always difficult to present over Zoom anyway, but then to do it when you've got, oh, the sound doesn't work and Nick's a bit of a bully and I've only got this amount of time, etc. And I thought you did it really, really well. And thanks so much. And you know, it reminded me a little bit of something that was said in the British Parliament a long time ago now, actually. It was when Tony Blair was Prime Minister and I was working at Downing Street. And there was a very new, young leader of the opposition then. Now he's a figure in history, but at that time he was a new, young leader of the opposition, a fellow called David Cameron. And it was question time, and Tony Blair was pretty good at question time. But I remember that David Cameron leaned forward and he said, "You were the future once." And it was a very, very powerful thing to say. And when we look at the intergenerational aspects of sustainability or climate response, you're the future. You're going to be taking decisions long after my time and our time, actually. I think probably for all people on the call, other than Hasti, who I can see here, who's probably as young as you are, maybe even younger, I don't know. But these intergenerational aspects, I think, are enormously important, and the whole notion of youth inclusion, it's of course through Fridays for the Future and other things has become far more salient and understandable than it used to be, but still I just do think it's enormously important. So I just wanted to underline that. And now we have our final speaker, and as we listen to Amol, do, as the audience, get your questions ready. Let's try and keep it lively. Amol, you, like everybody else, you have 8 minutes. Off you go.
Yes, thanks a lot, Nick. And I also thank LSE SU India Forum for inviting me here. And I consider myself as a representative of built environment over here, the industry, which actually contributes more than 33% of the emissions in our environment. That built environment industry after transportation is probably the second largest contributor. So in that case, the responsibility on our shoulders is also very, very high. I would say that. I also like the title of this particular program, The Quest for a Net Zero India. We accept and admit that this is going to be a kind of a struggle. And this particular struggle is going to require the participation and contribution from all the stakeholders. And again, the answers are not going to be easy. That is what we are admitting as a part of this. So, of course, India has a quest of, India is in the race of becoming a 5 trillion economy. But at the same time, like we also want to maintain our single-digit growth as well. But at the same time, it's not going to be so easy. And Professor Satya mentioned that India should not probably be doing this particular thing. But at the same time, we have immense responsibility on us to actually get going now and start making contribution in every possible sense. And at the same time, show the light to almost another 100 countries who might be in the kind of a similar situation like India, where their contribution should also increase, even though the kind of a contribution to the pollution and emission from their side is not much. But if everybody starts saying this, then nobody would do their work. Also, what can be done at present and what is being done in India is that solar energy, wind energy, we are working quite a lot on that particular part. We are also going with the electrification of our transport and industrial and residential energy efficiency we are trying to achieve. But at the same time, more adroit forest management, that is also will be required. I'll be speaking to that when I will be answering the 2 specific questions which Nick has posed for me. We need to get the equilibrium between the greenhouse emissions, but at the same time, government policies and private sector's initiatives that need to go hand in hand to achieve that. That is what I would say. The businesses are considered to be most irresponsible in the overall ecosystem, whereas we can see that those who are dwelling in the forest or those who are doing agriculture, maybe very small agriculture in India, because like the parcels are really small. So in this particular, those people are following more of an environment friendly policies as compared to businesses. Just now we heard that one pair of jeans may require 2000 liters of water. So that is something which is really colossal wastage of resources. And we need to do, everyone need to do their best in terms of understanding feasibilities, then also putting the kind of economics also in place while we are doing this particular part. Because again, the resources are limited and the kind of resources which are getting allocated, that's also pretty thin. But again, Professor Satya Rapati mentioned that Indian government has started doing its part, and with the experiment in Andhra Pradesh, that is something what you have seen. So what we need to do about the first question, what Nick has posed over here, that what are the two things about your work you want to share with a group of Indian students who deeply care about India's future and the environment? I currently am working as an Associate Dean and Director for RICA School of Built Environment, Amity University, Mumbai. I have worked in my entire 2.5 decades of career. About 10 years I have spent in education and 15 years in the industry. So that has given me a kind of a perspective that what are the things the industry should be doing for protection of the environment. One particular part of my career, I was working with a developer where I was responsible for constructing buildings. And those were the early days of green buildings construction. So today, like we have come about 1.5 decades from that particular part, and the green buildings are becoming kind of a more of a regular feature than somebody just building 2 or 3 green buildings in main cities. So in these green buildings, what we are talking about now is that right from the design to implementation and operations, the principles of green building should be utilized, because again, the buildings consume a huge amount of energy that they consume, and at the same time create a very worst sort of pollutions as created by that. So what we have to talk about is a life cycle costing. That is something which I understood, and the student should be working on this particular part. In the early days, we did not concentrate much on the life cycle costing. We talked only about construction cost and reduction of that, and also reducing energy during construction. But reducing energy during operations has become absolutely important, and a lot of retrofitting is something which is happening in the country at present. In the retrofitting also, it should find a place. Also, one more thing which is there is that we have started forgetting the deep understanding of principles of climatology, what we were actually using in our designs. So first, what we are doing is that we forget the principles, design a building, and then try to make that particular building energy efficient. This is something which we should not be doing. So right from planning of the building and design of the building, we should work on the efficiency of the building, and for that climatic principles and use of natural elements in the design that should be done. Knowledge about material and technology is also another area I would like to stress upon, that now the importance about the technology and material and the knowledge what we get in a country like in Asia or India, that we get this information very quickly from where these materials are basically getting developed. So in that case, there is no lag in terms of material availability and technology, that we should now start working upon development of indigenous material and technology so that we can continue to use that in green buildings. Modern technology is also available to us. This modern technology can actually save us time of construction. And the less time we spend on the site in terms of construction, then in that particular case, we have more opportunity of saving energy. So in that particular case, and I would like to highlight particularly Indian conditions, permissions take a lot of time. So sometimes no work takes place on site, but still like we need to keep the lights on, and we just need to keep the security on and all this thing, which causes wastage. So this is pure inefficiency in terms of doing the work. And many times we can see that the workers are simply not present on the site. That scenario is changing, but in next 10 years, I think this scenario should completely change. And there should not be any wastage in terms of any time spent, so that more energy would be utilized. artificial intelligence, building information modeling, data analytics, automation, and drone and robotics applications are coming up. So in that particular case, we also have to balance one thing, that while doing that, we actually not end up using more energy than what is intended for in the older techniques. At the same time, the loss of employment, that is also something which we need to be seen. With this, the employment loss also should not happen. And so the sector has to keep on balancing that particular part. Last part about this would be landscaping. I would say landscaping plays a very, very important role into this. And landscaping, now there are various ideas we are working upon: vertical garden, terraces. So actually, each and every square foot in the building should be utilized in one way or the other, so that the heat emissions and also the carbon dioxide absorption can take place. So that is something which I would like to tell the students, particularly of built environment, that you should start concentrating on that. The beginning has already happened. Now what you are going to do next is going to be important. And also as a associate dean and director of RICS School of Built Environment, we follow Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors competencies and their pathways in terms of designing our courses. So we are now going ahead with this particular part under 2018 guidelines. We have decided to make sustainability as a very important component of our all programs what we run: construction project management, real estate and urban infrastructure, facility management, and also the programs which we run in quantity surveying. In that, we have made sustainability as a very important component. And in that particular sustainability, we also are teaching it as a kind of a core subject also. And every subject, this module should be there. That is our idea. Then in terms of, we are also conducting various programs, events, call speakers, and they speak about sustainability in the special sessions we are arranging. I believe I have about 45 seconds, which I will try to sum up into that. Is that okay, Nick? Okay.
That's absolutely fine. 43 seconds. No, 40
okay,
seconds. No, sorry, no.
40 seconds.
So
in terms of two decisions, yes,
45,
two decisions
go.
which I believe the government should be working upon is we should start working on the forests. Like special forest economic zones is something we should work upon, because forests are the most misused resources what we have, and they can play a very important role in terms of energy conservation and also emission control. And last thing what I should do is that biofuel policy, because in case of India, we import a huge amount of fossil fuel we import, and our dependence is huge onto that particular part. And with resources at our disposal, we are still not working on the biofuel policy, which again is a kind of a challenging area, because again, if you're not done rightly, biofuel and growth of biofuel and all that can actually increase the kind of emission, because you may destroy forest and then start planting these biofuels plant over there. So in that case, a right balance is required into this. So afforestation and biofuel, these are the two decisions which the government should take, I think, as a part of this. Thank you.
Amol, thank you very much. Again, a really, really rich presentation, and broad. I mean, really broad presentations as well. And I think that's a good thing, because I think if we had just a session which was on global climate change, we would very soon be trading in acronyms and processes and COPs and numbers and data and all of that. So I think it's been a really nice, rich, varied set of presentations, which is really great. What I'd like to do is just ask a single question, if people will indulge me, a single question of each speaker. And I'm going to go backwards because Satya hasn't been speaking for a while. And I'm going to just maybe try and hone in on a particular element of what Satya shared, but also possibly something that he didn't mention, and I think is important and relevant. I really like the way that you constructed this tension between the moral and the practical argument. I think it's a really clever and insightful way to think about this, because absolutely, if it is who is responsible for the stock of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's certainly not developing countries. And this has been a long-running debate and a long-running tension in international climate negotiations. But also very clearly the way that you got across that this is a now problem. It's not a tomorrow problem. It's not an in 20 years time problem. It's a now problem. A very rich economy like Australia, which is my home, is in Sydney. 2 years ago, the whole of the city is surrounded by fire. and smoke and terrible air quality for more than 3 months through a summer. I speak to my friends this morning, and now we have Brisbane underwater, people having to be evacuated from Lismore. You've got another severe weather event, and this is now simply becoming part of what it means to be and to live in that part of the world. But one of the things in terms of our response is that if we were all speaking in October last year, we would be all talking about what in the public policy literature is referred to as a focusing event. And that focusing event was COP26 in Glasgow. And at that meeting, we had Rajendra Modi committing to cut emissions to net zero by 2070 and to reduce carbon emissions by 1 billion tonnes by 2030 and raise the share of a word not used by any of you, actually, interestingly, to raise the share of renewables in the energy mix to 50%. I was in a class where there was an eminent person who was giving a guest lecture, and I was quite surprised at how damning he was of the Indian perspective. Maybe I'm just getting more conservative and considered and have just been too involved in things over too long a time. But if anybody had said to me that Rajendra Modi would be making a commitment on net zero for any date, I would have been very happy. I think that the commitment in relation to renewables is a really positive start. But I go back to my point that the what questions are always easier than the how questions. And given your position now, Satya, and given your previous roles, maybe if you could just share with us and the audience your perspective on quite how the Indian government is or is failing to rise to this challenge.
Thank you, Nick. Very interesting question. I think what Prime Minister Modi announced is very ambitious, actually. And let me explain why. You have to peak your emissions before they start falling. It's science. This is not that a few people that are at the top of the policy pyramid get together in a room and say, hey, we're going to make a difference in the world, let's make it happen. It doesn't work like that in science. Not in the world of physics, for sure. So if you look at the United States, their emissions peaked in 1972. And they're promising to get to zero by 2050, which is a big if, but assuming it's all true, it is still almost 80 years that India's emissions are nowhere near peaking anytime soon. It's on the growth trajectory. So 2070 is an incredibly ambitious announcement by Prime Minister Modi. Like you, I was also very happy that he announced something, but I also understand the enormity of the promise and the unlikelihood of that being achieved, unless of course, we make a segue to things that matter the most. India is currently at 3 gigatons per annum. That's the annual emissions. It's the third largest emitter in the world, behind China at 12 gigatons and the US at 5. Now, while per capita it is very low, but in terms of absolute emissions, it's a lot of emissions. And India is currently doubling roughly about every 17 to 18 years, which will only accelerate beyond a certain exponential threshold. But assuming that the current growth trajectory remains as it is, which the IPCC is telling is going to go out of whack very soon, but believing that it'll remain the same, India would get to somewhere around China's current emissions by 2050, by when everybody should be at zero. Actually, preferably by 2040, actually, if we are to stay at 1.5 degrees, because it definitively by 2040, we'll hit 1.5 degrees. This is not speculation anymore, this is physics. We are already at 1.2. In the next 18 years, we're increasing by 0.2 every decade. We'll easily get to 1.5. That's not speculation anymore. And so India really needs to do its part, not because that it's a member of the global community and it should do more, but because it cares for its people. It's about people, it's about lives, it's about livelihoods, it's about the living environment. That's why India needs to act, not for anybody else, but for ourselves, for our people, our ecosystems, our rivers, our oceans. That's what is material to India being a strong and a country with an eye on the future.
Oh, Satya, thank you so much for that response. You and I could talk long into the night, I'm sure, about these issues. And in a way, I kind of look at the policy response to global climate change, and it doesn't matter whether you're in the US or you're in India or in the UK, even with its Climate Change Act, it's all unlikely to be enough at the moment. So we're engaged in an ongoing learning exercise, really, and we have to just keep the pressure up and keep trying to address new ways to reduce the risks of this wicked, wicked problem. Runa, I've got a question for you, and I'm going to start it off by telling you a story of my old Uncle Frank. Uncle Frank would have been 100 last January. He was in something called the rag trade, which is a very shorthand way of saying that you are in the business of fashion and clothing. But he was actually in the rag trade. What he took were rags, old bits of clothing, and he recycled them. And this was many, many years before any notion of the circular economy. And you mentioned circularity. And I think it's an enormously interesting area in terms of how we might think about what we do with the clothes that we wear and how they can be repurposed. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that, and whether you see that this is something that possibly can not just grow, but can actually become the sort of dominant way in which we can use the clothes that we wear.
Thank you, Nick. That's a very important and interesting question. So when we talk about upcycling or repurposing our clothes, like I said, 60% of the decision lies with the consumer once they buy the garments, because post that, people do not know what to do with their clothes. So the end of use is something that we're all working towards. Upcycling, there are a lot of designers and a lot of companies working towards it, where they not just upcycle old garments, but they're also working with large corporates like aviation companies, where they take their old seat covers and their curtains and they're kind of making them into bags and other products that could be probably introduced into the industry. It's estimated that there is 15% of wastage that happens at the cutting table when you cut a garment or a piece of garment. People do not know what to do with that, but that again is now used and repurposed into stuffings, into being shredded, being made into paper. So there are different ways that you could probably repurpose or upcycle your clothes. That's why I spoke about industry collaborations, because it's only when you collaborate with other industries where you have textiles, which is again a large part, then you would know how you could probably diversify this one t-shirt and not just use it as a t-shirt, but if you're talking to schools, for example, you can convert the t-shirt into a shopping bag. That's one of the projects we did with UN India, where we collaborated with Bangalore, which is a city I come from. And in Karnataka, we had all the schools that took t-shirts, old t-shirts that would have ended up into landfill, and made them into shopping bags. This was when, in 2019, when the law was passed against the use of single-use plastic. So to quickly answer your question, yes, it is the only way forward. Apart from upcycling, is also taking care of your clothes. A lot of mending is being taught back into schools, because people have realized that people have forgotten how to even sew a button, you know, or if you have a little tear in your garment, people do not know how to fix that. Clothes swaps are becoming huge. And yes, it is the future, because we have enough clothes. And every time I even go to a supermarket or go anywhere, I'm like, do we really need these clothes? Do we need these collections to keep coming out? Do we really need these shows? And probably one of the reasons I stopped making so much was because I was like, if you're going to be a brand, you need to ask yourself, do you first need to be a fashion brand out there? Does the world need more clothes? Or if you are being a brand, can you make a difference? And what you're making, could it change the lives of people? I hope that answered your question. It was a long way around, but.
That was a terrific answer, and I think also a really hopeful answer. I was really pleased to hear you be so ambitious, actually, about the way in which circularity can become intrinsic to the industry. And I think, you know, it in a way, it sort of leads me into the question that I want to pose to you, Garvita, as well. It just is so clumsy for a white middle-aged man, even though I'm in a white shirt, to try and quote Mahatma Gandhi, right? It just doesn't come across. It's just not going to work, right? But this notion of being the change that you want to see. And when you think about the global climate problem, or you think about any challenge in relation to sustainability, of course it's to do with international finance. Of course it's to do with big policies made at major international meetings. Of course it's about who's going to win the next government election in India. It's about all these really, really big things. But it's also about what goes on between our ears and in our heads, and how we think about our relationship every day and every moment of every day with the activities that lead to the amenity that we enjoy, the food that we eat, the clothes that we wear, how we get from A to B, how we think about our position in the world. And I suppose for you, as someone who I'm confident is going to be making a really, really big difference, and already is, but is going to be making a really big difference over the coming years, I wonder if you could sort of share with us your perspective on the relationship between these two elements of the sort of change that we need to make, the big changes, but also the changes that we can just make walking home from where we are to where we're going to be sleeping. You know, do we pick up that bit of rubbish? Do we care about that person? Do we think about the clothes? Do we think about the, you know, all of that? So maybe if you could just say a few words on that, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that ties in really beautifully with also the candor of the rest of the panelists. I think the fact that all of us have been conscious about asking ourselves those hard questions when we make decisions, both with within our ecosystems and the way that we, choose to move forward. And I see one thing that ties all of this perhaps together, and it is the choice that we have chosen to make. And when I think of where that stems from, and when I specifically think about it for myself, I sort of go back to the way that I was brought up. I've been brought up in an ecosystem where I was not allowed to leave a grain of food on my plate. I wasn't allowed to waste a drop of water in my glass. I've spent more birthday parties at orphanages than actually having a party, just, to build that empathy. And I really credit my parents for having given me that ecosystem. And I see that commonality between young people around me who today are perhaps changing or making a difference or making different choices. I recollect when I had to choose between studying abroad or staying back in India 4 years ago to do my undergrad studies. I chose to be here because the water crisis was rising and I knew I had a solution and I wanted to stay here and do my bit to solve it. Be a part of those ecosystems that were perhaps, helping. And I realized that I had the courage to make that decision because I had been taught to think like that. I want to share one, quick story, and this was a post that I had seen on Instagram a while back. It was of this color pencil, which was peach in color, and it said that from when we're young, we're taught that this is skin color, and that's the end of it. When you go to art class, you're taught that bright, orangish, whitish color is skin color. You're not taught that any other colors can be skin color. And that's where the whole prejudice starts. It starts in our own minds because of the way that we've been raised or just the things that we've been taught. And I think those decisions will change with the generations to come when we change the way that we are educated, when we change the way that we're told fairy tales, when we change the way that we're told fables, all of these ideas and small things from the very, very beginning are when they are twisted and brought and built for this new ecosystem. We'll be building people who are ready to change for the world. And I think to answer your question, that's the kind of ecosystem we need to create.
Maybe we need heart and we need head as well, and these things aren't necessarily intentional. Maybe that's one way of thinking about it. Thank you so much. That was such a lovely and clear answer, Garvita. Amol, you know what's coming. It's another question.
Yes.
You were very disciplined in completing your 2 within 45 seconds. I'd like you to just concentrate on one of them, which is forestry.
Okay.
I'd like to understand a little bit more about what you mean. Do you mean avoided deforestation, or do you mean afforestation? And I'd like to maybe link that a little bit back to what was said earlier by Satya, because there's a growing understanding of nature-based solutions and approaches to tackling global climate change, because rather than a new whiz-bang technology, what you can actually do is promote natural processes to operate in such a way that can do things such as enrich soil or draw down carbon dioxide at scale in a way which is going to be a positive with regard to addressing the global climate problem. So I wonder if, given your background, you could elaborate a little bit more on that. And maybe if you felt able, and I don't want to guide you towards this, but sort of link it to how you might think about the built environment and whether or not forestry, wood can actually play a larger role rather than some other inputs such as cement and steel, which tend to be pretty high carbon in their creation. So maybe your perspectives on that would be really interesting.
Yes, thanks a lot for this question. So what I meant by use of a special economic zone for forest or special forest zone was actually getting into the effective management of forests. I mentioned that it's one of the most underutilized kind of a resource, and where it is not basically being managed properly. Ideally, the kind of forest cover in a country like India should be around 33%, but that itself is not there. It is in probably about high 20s. That is what the current forest cover is. And the quality of that forest cover is also not so good. In fact, there are large tracts of land which are only in the possession of the Ministry of Environment and Forest and the department. That's why we call that as forests. There are no trees over there, which used to be there, or there are plantations like teakwood and other plantations are there, which definitely have come up by removing the natural tropical forests. So in that particular case, we have an urgent need to look at the kind of a forests what we have, both in terms of quality and quantity of the forests that need to be improved. And the kind of age-old idea of government department only managing that probably is not going to work out. And so wherever possible, to a small extent, pilot projects should be started so that the private sector involvement can be done. Right now, it is being done only at the level of sanctuaries and national parks where some kind of tourism component is there. So only there we are involving private sector. But I think private sector should get involved in terms of plantations, in terms of management and maintenance of that as far as the forests which are outside the city limits are concerned. And then the kind of forest produce which comes over there, the locals have a role to play into this. And there are concepts like Deva Rai, which is again a Sanskrit word, but I will translate it for you. The concept of Deva Rai is God's own forest. And so that people, they don't do much mischief with that particular part. That is something which is absolutely important, that kind of concept. And that kind of concept should actually spread across India. In Northeast, in Himalayas, or in some parts of Nilgiris, this concept is being followed. But even in other cases also it should be done. My second point is about how to increase the trees and the forest cover even in the cities. Like for example, Mumbai is one of the blessed cities with about 140 square kilometers of a national park within its municipal corporation city limit. Even Delhi also has North Ridge and Southern Ridge, North Ridge and South Ridge, where the spurs of Aravallis, which were actually forest, which are within the limits of a city. These kind of forests need to be conserved within the cities also. Then we come to the built environment, where the landscaping should become a very important part. Like, for example, if there are dead faces of the building, the dead faces can be covered into vertical gardens that can be converted into that. All terraces and other areas, the gardens should be put over there. Of course, water is a very big problem. So unless and until you basically solve this particular problem in an integrated manner, then only you will able to give justice to all these particular part. And then also in terms of management and maintenance, there is what we call as there is a forest Miyawaki, I think, Miyawaki. That's the kind of a forest, which is a Japanese technique. I'm probably not getting the name right, but it's a Japanese technique of dense forestation in small patches, 1 acres, 2 acres, 5 acres, that kind of size of patches. That is something which should be done. Last concept I would like to put, that in case of India, incentives work in a very big way. So there is something called what we call as green transferable development rights, green TDR. So in this case, developers and industrialists, if they developed green patches and even small forests into certain portions of the cities or in the regions, then they should be given probably an additional built up area to build in their particular projects. So contribute towards the environment and also get benefited, because in case of India, the shortage of housing is also a very big thing. And then if you can meet that particular part by giving additional TDR, transfer of development rights, or additional permissible built up area to the developers, they are going to take this in a very, very positive way. The same thing can be done for industries. Like, for example, refineries are highly polluting industries. And I would like to cite an example where Reliance Refinery at Jamnagar, they have planted this mango plantation over there. That was actually done to curb the pollution which the refinery creates. But today it has created a huge amount of income, but export quality mangoes are basically being grown over there. So what is more important over there is professionalism that is required, professional approach is required, but at the same time, the heart and head combination, what you mentioned as the last part of your speech, I think that is something which is important. These problems should not be dealt with only heart or only head. The combination of heart, head, hands, that is something which is very important. So that's what I mean by this particular part. As a built environment professional, as a polluter, I now like to pay, and I would like to pay by contributing in a positive way towards this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Amol. Now, look, I've got a number of questions which have been ably sent to me by Hasti, who's working away there behind the scenes, somewhere in the computer that I'm looking at. And the question that I would like to ask is to you, Runa. And this gets to maybe the tension that there is between sustainability and growth. And the question goes as following, is that whilst going back to old traditions ensures that the environment is sustained, how do we ensure that the textile industry continues to grow and is a viable career opportunity for people?
That's a fantastic question. So if you're talking about the textile industry, India is at 100 billion and it's poised to increase. We've got probably the second largest spinning factories in the world. And at the same time, if you're looking at it poising to be profitable and to be sustainable, there are different ways of looking into manufacturing textiles. Now, we're looking at cellulosic man-made fibers, but you have a lot of trees that are cut. But people are looking at, waste food, for example. It could be fruit that's converted into yarn. People are looking, like I just had a talk with the EU, and they're working with straw cellulose and trying to make that into fiber. So it's going to be all regionally based, where they don't have to outsource. They are trying to phase out plastics and yarns that are made from synthetics. They're looking at bioplastics, which is still very nascent, but has a large potential, again, in textiles. There are products being made because of fermentation. In fact, Allbirds, which is a shoe brand, has tied up, and they have their sole, which is made of fermented corn, which if I'm not mistaken. So you have different innovations that are coming up in textiles, and the textile industry is definitely poised to do a lot more interesting things. Sustainability is the way forward because there's a lot of investment now coming into design, and especially the blue and green economy. When I'm talking about the blue economy, we're talking about the fabric of the oceans where seaweed is harvested and that is mixed with cellulose to form yarn. Now, there could be an argument where you'd be like, but cellulosic fibers are bad, which is true because some of it, yes, you do get it from trees. But when you reduce the percentage of 100% cellulose and mix it with, like, say, a seaweed, you are automatically reducing the cellulosic consumption. So yeah, so we have a lot of innovations coming forward in the textile industry where it's going to be new and the future.
Hey, Runa, thank you so much for that. It reminds me that somebody once asked me, Nick, do you work on global climate change and sustainability because you want to change the world? Or do you work on it because you find it endlessly intellectually interesting? And I was at a I was at a conference about a year ago, and somebody sidled up to me, and this incredibly well qualified person from Berkeley University was saying that they seriously thought that the future of textiles was going to be seaweed. And he went through all of these reasons, and you thought, oh gosh, okay. I hadn't thought about that before. So, you know, it was just so interesting. Now, Garvita, get ready. I've got a question for you. They're coming in thick and fast. And this, I suppose, is the tension again between not only head and heart, but also how one thinks about change. As Hasti knows, as students of public policy, there are plenty of really solid theories about how we might think about achieving positive change beyond boundaries. But the question is that from a wider policy perspective, how can we assure a top-down policy that ensures water consumption and management is controlled and not excessive? So I suppose interested in your perspective beyond the immediate and beyond the actions that one can just readily take through to the really big decisions about infrastructure and about investment and about public policy. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, and it's so interesting that you asked that question. I think the first step would be to create ecosystems that motivate and push for innovation in such a manner that your entire process when it comes to water consumption can be made more efficient. And so why this was interesting to me was my final year project at university, and I'm an engineering student, and my final year project was to build a water optimization system for an apartment that focused on reducing its dependencies on natural resources by over 60%. And also maintaining and trying to recycle the water that was already within the ecosystem, right? And what I realized was within my university ecosystem and a lot of university ecosystems, building solutions that are focused on bettering climate, on bettering the planet, on bettering the environment, or even, be it building more efficient ecosystems is something that isn't promoted. We're pumping out students who are capable, who are, smart, and who have the capability to build these ideas, but they aren't incentivized to do it. They aren't told that this is also a possibility. This is something that, we need your brains to work on. And I think to bring in a more of a top-down approach would be primarily to use this resource. And as just going back right at the beginning, we spoke about Indian students and what they can do. And utilizing, no matter what you have, studied, you can be an engineer, you can be a CA, you can be whatever you want, right? But the idea is, what are you doing with the knowledge that you have built, and are you being incentivized to do it? And so that's the kind of policy I would, envision to see.
Oh, thank you. That was a really, really clear response. And, there's nothing worse in one of these Zoom things where it just goes on and on and on, and everybody's busy and they've got other things to do. So I'm not going to allow that to happen. We've got 3 minutes, and I want to take the time to just seriously appreciate all of the contributions from the people on this call. I know we all use Zoom, we all use technology. Post the pandemic, we've had to use it a lot more. It's a miraculous technology. I mean, it's amazing that we can all be together in this way, but equally we're not together. We're actually distant. We're apart. And I just want to take the opportunity to say that maybe one day we will be together. We don't need to be all together in the same room, but at some point I might be going through Bangalore or Madras or Delhi or whatever, and I'll contact Hasti on WhatsApp and I'll say, can you give me their details? Because I'd like to catch. And equally, if any of you were ever in London, the London School of Economics, as of course Satya knows, it's not hard to find, and you'd all be really, really welcome here. But sadly, the kitchen facilities up here on level 5 of the centre building aren't good enough for me to actually make either chana masala deer or dal makhani or anything else that I would normally in generosity want to share. But I do just want to thank everybody for being involved. I want to thank the audience as well. We all don't need to be here, but we are. And I just want to say thank you. And of course, thank you to all the people behind the scenes, Hasti and many other members of the LSE India Forum here at the LSE, just to have made this all possible and to make it run so very well. So it's a big thank you from me, your humble chair. And it's now time for the Zoom wave. Hasti, Zoom wave, can we do that?
Yes, but
Yep.
thank you very much to everybody, and it was a very, very enriching session. Thank you all panelists and definitely Professor Nick. It was definitely fun and insightful to learn
Okay.
a lot. Thank you,
Good.
panelists. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, all right. It's time for the Zoom wave. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.